Hi, I'm Dr. Sylvia Peregrino, and this is Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. Today, we're continuing our conversation with Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, who represents the Congressional District 16 here in El Paso and Horizon. Thank you for staying with us, Congresswoman Escobar.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful to visit with you.
Often, our students don't necessarily know, what does a member of Congress do?
Well, we do a lot, and it's it's an interesting job and set of responsibilities because it's almost like you have two jobs. So here in El Paso, I have a district office, and when I'm not in Washington D.C., I'm in the district office, either visiting with folks like you, members of the community to connect with folks. Or, I'll be speaking at neighborhood association meetings or at other community meetings so that folks know what's going on in DC and so that I can be available to answer questions. It's also when I have the opportunity to meet with stakeholders. So for example, as we were dealing with COVID, I'd have meetings with the hospital CEOs to see what they needed. I'd have meetings with the superintendents to see what they needed, how the federal government could help. So in El Paso, our work is very hands-on, on the ground, being in the community and gaining a constant understanding of the needs and how we can be helpful in DC. Usually about 3 weeks out of every month, I'm in Washington. We have votes, generally like Mondays through Thursdays, and so we're voting on legislation every single day. At the same time, I'm attending committee hearings or committee markups where we actually mark up legislation. I have meetings with, because I'm on the Armed Services Committee, I will frequently have meetings with leaders in the Department of Defense or world leaders as well, for example, or members of parliament. And so there's a lot of national and international activity that happens in the DC office. And my weeks will be really busy. I'll fly to DC on Sundays normally so that I'm there for Monday, work on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Hopefully votes are done by Thursday early afternoon. I run to the airport, get on a plane, get to El Paso Thursday night, spend time in the district on Friday and Saturday, and then hit repeat on Sunday, fly back to DC, do votes, participate in committee hearings, come back for the weekend, and then I will get some stretches of time in El Paso. So it's challenging because there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of obligations and responsibilities, and at the same time, I'm consistently meeting with my team in DC about laws that we want to write or change, about appropriations, money that we want to get to El Paso, how do we best get it to the community, sharing what we've learned in the district, here's what's happening with homelessness in El Paso, or here's what's happening in healthcare, how can we be helpful? So it's a very dynamic environment. Frequently, no 2 days are the same.
So every day is unique and poses its challenges. And I'm curious, as a political scientist, how is it different? Because now this new Congress, your party is in the minority, whereas previously they were in the majority. So how is it different?
It is definitely different. So you're right. As your students know, there's two chambers in Congress. There's the House of Representatives and there's the United States Senate. And the seats in those chambers come up at different times. So I have to run for re-election every 2 years. So every 2 years I have to ask the community to hire me again, to allow me to continue my work. In the Senate, they have 6-year terms. So they have a longer stretch before they have to run. And you need a majority to control each one of the chambers. In the Senate has a very slim majority, so my party is in control, the Democratic Party is in control in the Senate. In the House of Representatives, we lost control over the midterms last November. But the Republican Party has a slim majority, just like we did. So it flipped in some ways. And it's very, very different. when you have the majority, you get what's called the gavel. So the big gavel that the Speaker of the House holds, and that means the controlling party has the gavel in committees as well. And that means a lot of control, a lot of power. You can control what bills come to the committee so that they ultimately get ready to go to the House floor. It means in many ways you drive the appropriations process, how we spend money. And you still have to collaborate with the opposing party, but when you have control, you definitely are driving that train. We don't have control as of January 3rd. We don't have control, so the majority party, the Republican Party, is driving the agenda. They have now had control for about 6 weeks, and they have shown us what their interest is in. You know, as soon as we had control, we were passing bills to help improve Americans' lives, to save businesses after the pandemic, to help infuse resources to local governments so that they could take care of public safety, public health. What we have seen from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are efforts to continue to take away reproductive freedom from women, investigations into Twitter and Hunter Biden's laptop. I would say it's a pretty stark contrast, and I'm hoping that we regain the majority in the next election.
And so speaking of self-made crisis, I know one of the things that I mentioned to my students is the fact that the U.S. needs to raise the debt ceiling, that otherwise, that right now the Treasury is kind of doing accounting tricks so that they don't go bankrupt. And so I don't know if you've been in any part of those conversations, or if you see, because if not, the U.S. is going to default on its debt by the summer.
That's right.
So I'm, I have an elderly mother-in-law, so I'm worried about her Social Security, if there's going to be a check in the mail for her, or if I should start saving up just in case, we need to start paying for her health care. And so I know I'm concerned about that, but I don't know how those because you're there, so maybe you've already been a part of some of those conversations.
Yeah, we are entering really dangerous territory as a country. And it's two things. It's the debt ceiling, which as you mentioned, is coming up this summer, but then there's also funding the government in October. And we are seeing red flashing signs of danger. My Republican colleagues who are in control of the House are using the debt ceiling as leverage to try to extract budget cuts from us. And those two things are not related. And just as an example, every month I work on my family budget, and I've got a budget how much I need to set aside to pay my electric bill, my gas bill, my cell phone bill, my car payment, my mortgage. And those are costs that my family, my husband and I decided to incur. We chose to buy a house, so we've got a mortgage payment. We chose to buy a car, we've got a car payment. We want to heat our home in the winter, we've got a heating bill. We want to turn on the lights, we've got an electric bill. Can you imagine if the American public, any family like yours or mine, decided, well, we've enjoyed a warm house all month, we've enjoyed the electricity all month, I lived in my home all month, but I may not pay my bills. And I'm not going to pay my bills because I want to force my husband to make some changes in the budget going forward. Well, you got to pay your bills, and the United States needs to pay its bills. If we don't, there is the threat of an economic catastrophe. The markets could tumble, we could lose American jobs, and it won't just impact the US economy. Our economy has an impact on the global economy. So incredibly irresponsible behavior could impact everybody's jobs and pocketbook come this summer. I am a big believer we've got to fix the deficit, which is why I was a supporter of the Inflation Reduction Act. We paid down $1.7 trillion of the deficit with our bill that we passed last year. But you address a deficit, really, you can do it in one of two ways. You can either cut a lot of spending, or you can make your revenues adjust for what you're spending. So when we look at what we can cut, Republicans basically have not told us what they are going to cut yet. They have claimed that they are not going to touch Social Security. We'll wait and see if they keep that promise. But some of the most costly aspects of government are national defense, as an example, or earned benefits like Social Security. If they decide they don't want to cut that, there are very few places to cut. But those places to cut will impact communities like ours the most. Or the alternative is to do what we have been advocating, which is make the wealthiest Americans and the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share. Part of the reason why the deficit has exploded recently is because the prior administration gave massive tax breaks to the wealthiest corporations and the wealthiest Americans, the top 1%, claiming that it would help all of us. Well, many of us believe, we know, we understand, when Amazon doesn't pay a single penny in taxes, that doesn't necessarily help all of us put food on the table or pay our own bills or grow our local economies. So they're playing a very dangerous game of chicken. We have said we are going to protect Americans and their earned benefits. We want to protect jobs. We want to protect our economy. If you want to talk about the deficit, let's talk about rewriting the tax code. Let's do this responsibly. But in the end, they're in charge. So we'll see what happens. My hope is that they feel the pressure, ultimately, that they do the right thing and they don't create economic turmoil.
And so in the past, we have had government shutdowns for a few weeks, and that hasn't been good. I know that I saw a statistic that El Paso has like the 4th highest concentration of government workers.
Yeah.
And so when the government stops paying a large chunk of members of our community, that hits our community disproportionately.
Absolutely. And that's the second flashing red light, is a potential government shutdown in October. And that could happen if my Republican colleagues don't put forth a budget. They need to put forth a budget that the Senate will agree to, that we can agree to. In the past, we have responsibly passed our budgets when we have been in charge. We've done it in the summer. We should be starting to work on our budget right now, but we've not, with our Republican colleagues yet, started to work on a budget. So let's say we get past the debt ceiling, which I hope we do, and I hope that my colleagues agree to paying past bills they helped incur. Then we have to make sure that we pass an appropriations bill that the Senate will pay or will agree to fund in time for October 1st. If not, we may need what's called a continuing resolution. Basically, we write a check to give us a little bit more time, buy us more time. But in the past, that's been another leverage point for my Republican colleagues. In fact, when I was sworn into Congress the first time, I was sworn into a shutdown government. And they shut down the government, and in my very first few weeks of being in Congress, I spent a lot of time meeting with El Paso federal employees. They couldn't afford to buy groceries. They had very little savings. They had to still pay their mortgage payment, their car payment, their own bills. Some of our federal employees in El Paso also were considered essential, so they were forced to go to work without pay. And they still had to pay for childcare and to put gas in their car to get to and from work. It is, there's some real threats ahead, and I'm really, really hoping that cooler heads will prevail and that my Republican colleagues will work with us to address some of these challenges that we want to take on, but that they do it in a responsible way and not with the kind of hostage taking that they have been doing of late.
And so for for somebody that's watching this that then is starting to get concerned about their salary, what when you hear from constituents either through email, phone call, or a town hall kind of meeting, do Congress members actually listen? Do you feel that it impacts you when you have 100 people show up to a meeting?
It depends on the member of Congress, but for me, it absolutely impacts me. I have heard, like during a past government shutdown, hearing those stories directly from federal employees has been really moving and heartbreaking. And it motivates you to try to find a solution even more quickly to end people's suffering and stress. But I think this is so important. This is why I really appreciate that you keep your students informed about what's going on. The American public needs to know what's going on so that they can contact not just their House representative, but they need to contact their senators as well, members of the U.S. Senate who are supposed to work in partnership with us on these very key issues. And it's why it's so important that everybody vote. It's these elections, a lot of these elections were neck and neck. And in the end, you want a grown-up. You want a responsible person who is interested in governing and doing right by his or her community in that position of power. A lot of what's happening in Washington has been very performative. You see a lot of members of Congress spending a lot of time on Twitter, spending a lot of time attacking their colleagues. We have to do the work of governing, but we need our constituents to hold us accountable to that as well.
And I think you make an excellent point that often people don't vote, or maybe in the case of your election that comes up every 2 years, they feel, well, didn't I just do that a little while ago? Why do I need to show up? I know I encourage my students to register and to even know who's running for office, because I think you can see policy differences between the candidates and the parties. So even in primaries and general elections.
Absolutely. And it's easier than ever before to find out about people and to learn about their policy platforms, to call also candidates to find out where they stand on certain positions, issues that are important to you. Where do your representatives stand on that? And frequently, especially with local races, the turnout is so low. And all levels of government impact our lives, whether it be Congress and the way that our decisions impact the national and global economy, or state leaders whose laws impact who can carry a gun where and how safe you might be, or whether or not public education is funded, to local leaders like city council, how we grow as a community, or school board, how we teach our future generation. All of these elections are so critical, and it starts early. You've got to get informed, you've got to get committed, but you've also got to feel ownership about your community. Like, I care enough to want good things for us, and I'm going to support people who want those good things for us as well.
Speaking of policy issues, for this term that you just got in, what are your top 3 priorities?
Well, I will tell you, immigration is one of the top priorities for me. As challenging and unlikely as it seems with a Republican-controlled House of Representatives, I do still believe there's a path. And we've got to fix this legislatively, because if we continue to treat immigration as a border-only issue, then we'll just have a broken border for another 2 years. Until we have a change up again in Congress. But I'm working with colleagues on a bipartisan basis to try to forge a path forward on that. So that's really critical for me. Last Congress, we passed historic legislation in infrastructure, climate, innovation, manufacturing. My second priority is implementation of that, making sure El Paso gets her fair share of those resources, that we tap into that money that is going to be made available to communities across the country. I want us to be near the front of the line to get those benefits, to make sure that we are innovating, that we are growing jobs, that we're seeing that kind of investment in our community. And then third, I want to, I have policy priorities with each one of my committees. So I'm on the House Judiciary Committee, gun violence prevention, immigration, the Constitution. I have some priorities around those issues. I'm also on the House Armed Services Committee, so I have priorities around Fort Bliss. There are ways we're addressing the climate crisis through armed services as well. So I want to continue to work on that arena. And then continue to do some of the foreign policy work that has been so critical, especially as we see challenges to democracy abroad.
In one of the redistricting plans, they actually wanted to take out Fort Bliss from your district and from El Paso, and I think put it in House District 23.
Right.
Why is it important that Fort Bliss stay in El Paso or with Congressional District 16?
Yeah, that was a really scary time, and I made multiple attempts to reach out to my colleague in Texas 23 to ask him to please not do this to us. Please not to take Fort Bliss from Congressional District 16. In the end, thanks to to members of the El Paso delegation, we were able to stave off some of that impact at the state level because the state ultimately draws those maps, but we weren't able to prevent some of the damage. So some of Fort Bliss is in Texas 23, which is anchored in San Antonio, but we kept many of the assets on Fort Bliss in Texas 16, which is anchored in El Paso. The last time we had two representatives who represented Fort Bliss in a similar way, we lost during the base realignment and closure. And losing not just service members, but we lose civilian jobs as well. So when there's that kind of competition, we need El Paso fighting for El Paso.
Perhaps the person that's based in San Antonio is going to be more focused on bases in those areas than in our region.
That's correct. That's the fear.
Speaking of relations with your colleagues, do you have, I know, or at least I'm led to believe that there's a lot of partisanship in Congress, but are there representatives that you get along with or that you were talking about co-sponsoring legislation?
Yes, absolutely. And there is a lot of division, no doubt. But I do go out of my way to reach across the aisle to try to find areas of unity with my Republican colleagues, because that's how you get things done. And so, as I mentioned, immigration is important. It's only going to happen if we can get Republican support, because unless we have a supermajority, both in the House and in the Senate, we're just going to keep punting as a Congress. And it's been 30 years. We can't keep punting. So I'm having conversations with some of my Republican colleagues. I'm going to be bringing some Republican colleagues to El Paso as well in a bipartisan trip in an effort to help show them where the opportunities are for reform. But I am a big believer that bipartisanship is important.
And I know as a faculty member, I've had a lot of students that are DACA students, DACA recipients that are dreamers, and they're also kind of in limbo because Congress hasn't acted on comprehensive immigration reform.
That's right. And the only real action that's happened around immigration has come from the White House. DACA, Dreamers, that was an Obama-era executive order. The president has tried to uphold it, but it's been challenged in the courts by Republican-led states. We need to create stability. It's in our own best interest. You know, we have an historic worker shortage. We see it in El Paso. I hear it from El Paso business owners that they want more workers. We, at the same time, in the United States, Americans aren't having as many babies as we used to. So that means our population is declining. If we are going to be competitive, if we are going to be a global economic leader, we need people. And so if we're not having families that are as large as they once were, there's only one other way to get people, and that's immigration. It is advantageous to us to pass immigration reform, to create a more orderly border, but also to broaden our workforce.
And I think that a lot of dreamers or a lot of people that come do have a stronger work ethic. And so hopefully, this Congress is the one that's able to get it done. So Congresswoman, I know we've touched upon a lot of topics. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add.
I will close with this. I really love hearing from our young people and from students. And I would encourage your students, if they would like to engage in a dialogue, I'd love to visit one of your classes at some point to hear what's on their mind. But their voice is so important and so critical, not just in a dialogue, though, at election season. They, whoever they choose to vote for, whatever their values, we need engaged Americans so that we have government that reflects who we are and where we want to go.
I know I will take you up on that invitation. I'm teaching a federal government class this semester, and so to end, does your office offer internship opportunities for students?
We do. We have internships throughout the year, both here in the district office as well as in Washington, D.C.
And that's wonderful. That would be wonderful for our students to, if they can, to be able to take a semester and intern in D.C. I know that I did that as well, and I lived in D.C. for a while. So a wonderful opportunity. So thank you. And are these paid? Because often they're not.
So for some of them, we are able to get funding for them. So not all internships are paid, but believe me, we work hard to try to pay all of our interns.
We'll put your office information so that students can, if they're interested in applying, they can contact your district office or your DC office.
Yes, exactly. They can visit our webpage, escobar.house.gov, and just click on the internship link.
And so, Congresswoman Escobar, thank you for being our guest. Thank you for sharing some of the things that are going on in DC and for representing us in Washington.
My pleasure. It really is a privilege to work for this community. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Silvia Peregrino. This is Entre Nosotras, Latina Voices. Our guest has been Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, who represents Congressional District 16, encompassing El Paso, Fort Bliss, and Horizon. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you.